20 weird facts about Air Force One you didn't know. Picture this. A nuclear bomb just went off somewhere below you. The ground is gone, the country is in chaos, and the President of the United States is still running the entire military from the sky, safe, connected, and completely unreachable. That is not a movie plot. That is exactly what Air Force One was built to do. But before we even get to the nuclear stuff, here's the first thing most people get wrong. Air Force One is not actually a plane. It is a call sign. The moment the President steps onto any U.S. Air Force aircraft, that plane becomes Air Force One. Step off, and it goes back to being a regular military jet. If he flies on a Navy plane, it becomes Navy One. A Marine helicopter? That is Marine One. The famous blue and white Boeing 747 that everyone pictures when they hear the name is technically called the VC-25A by the Air Force. And here is something most people do not know. There are two of them. Two identical planes sitting ready at all times with the same equipment, the same paint job, the same everything. Nobody outside a very small circle knows which one the President is actually on during any given flight, and that is entirely intentional. Now, keeping two identical flying command centers on permanent standby is not cheap. Operating Air Force One costs over $200,000 for every single hour it is in the air. A round trip from Washington, D.C. to California runs more than $2 million in flight time alone. And that does not include the fighter jets flying escort, the cargo planes carrying the presidential motorcade, or the advanced security teams already on the ground at the destination. The Air Force employs over 100 people just to maintain and operate these two planes full-time. Every year, the total program costs hundreds of millions of dollars. Critics call it outrageous. Security experts say you cannot put a price on keeping the president alive. The truth is probably somewhere in between, though much closer to the security experts than most people would like to admit. Because here is why the cost starts to make sense. That plane was designed to survive a nuclear war. During the Cold War, engineers had to answer a question most people never want to think about. What happens if nuclear war starts while the president is airborne? Their answer was to build a plane that could handle it. The entire fuselage is wrapped in special shielding that blocks radiation. Every electronic system is hardened against the electromagnetic pulse a nuclear detonation creates. The pulse that would instantly fry every unprotected computer and radio on the ground. The windows are reinforced. The floors and walls are thicker than any commercial aircraft. Engineers tested all of this against simulated nuclear blasts to make sure it would hold. The idea was simple, even if the engineering was not. If the worst happens, the president needs to keep running the country from the sky. And if he needs to stay in the sky, the plane can do that too, indefinitely. Air Force One is equipped for aerial refueling. A tanker aircraft flies alongside, extends a hose, and pumps fuel from one plane to the other while both are doing 600 miles per hour. The president never has to land. During a genuine national emergency, he could stay airborne for days, with tanker planes rotating in to keep the fuel flowing. Even without refueling, the plane carries enough fuel to fly 7,800 miles on a single tank. That is Washington, D.C. to Tokyo without stopping. With tankers in the picture, distance becomes irrelevant entirely. Keeping all of that technology running takes an extraordinary amount of wiring. 238 miles of it, to be exact. That is enough electrical cable to stretch from Washington, D.C. to New York City and still have wire left over. It connects 85 telephones, encrypted satellite systems, a full medical suite, a conference room, a communications center, climate controls for every section of the plane, and backup systems for all of the above. Every wire is color-coded, labeled, and shielded against electromagnetic interference. If one system fails, another takes over immediately, and no one on board notices the switch. Speaking of those 85 phones, every single one of them uses military-grade encryption. It does not matter if the plane is cruising above the Atlantic or over a war zone. The president can reach any world leader, any military commander, or his own family, and the call cannot be intercepted. On September 11, 2001, President George W. Bush commanded the entire national response from Air Force One while the country was under attack. The phones worked perfectly during the most chaotic hours in modern American history. That was not an accident. That was the design doing exactly what it was built to do. And the plane is just as prepared for a medical emergency as it is for a national security one. The onboard medical suite is not a first aid kit. It is a functioning surgical facility with a full operating table, surgical equipment, and enough supplies to handle almost any emergency at altitude. A military doctor travels on every single flight. They keep blood stored on board that matches the president's blood type. The doctor can perform surgery at 600 miles per hour without landing. When President George H.W. Bush needed medical attention mid-flight, The crew handled it without diverting the plane and without any public drama whatsoever. After a surgery, presumably, someone would need a meal, and the kitchen can handle that too. Air Force One has 2 full galleys staffed by military chefs who hold top security clearance. They can prepare anything from a simple sandwich to a 5-course dinner for 100 people simultaneously, because the plane carries up to 102 passengers, spread across 4,000 square feet of interior space. That is bigger than most people's houses. The president gets a private bedroom with a real bed, a private office, a private bathroom with a shower, and a conference room where he can meet with advisors and make decisions at 35,000 feet. Fresh food is loaded before every flight, and enough of it is stored on board to feed everyone for an entire week without resupply. The head chef keeps detailed notes on exactly what each president likes and dislikes. President Trump preferred his steaks well done. President Obama leaned toward lean proteins and vegetables. The china they serve it on carries the Air Force One seal. No detail is too small when you are feeding the most protected person on the planet. The reporters who travel along on these flights do not get the presidential menu, and they also do not get a free ride. Every journalist on board gets billed the equivalent of a first-class commercial ticket for the same route, paid by their network. They sit in the back section only. They cannot wander through the plane without permission. Sometimes the president invites them forward for questions. Most of the time, he does not. The money collected from press seats goes back to the government, which barely makes a dent in the $200,000 per hour, but at least it is something. If you are still watching and you have not subscribed yet, now is a good time. There is a lot more where this came from. What no reporter ever gets to photograph is the defensive side of the aircraft. Air Force One carries flares that deploy automatically if a heat-seeking missile is fired at the plane. Sensors detect the launch, the system releases flares that burn hotter than the engines, and the missile chases the decoy instead of the aircraft. Beyond the flares, the Air Force confirms that additional countermeasures exist, but will not say what they are. Credible reports point to radar jamming systems and electronics that can confuse targeting systems mid-flight. No missile has ever come close to hitting Air Force One in the history of the program, whether that is because of the countermeasures, the fighter escort, or just the fact that nobody has tried, nobody is saying. In fact, almost nothing about the plane's defensive capabilities is public. The specific systems are classified. The communication frequencies are classified. Even the detailed cost of building the next generation of planes is classified, though the headline number has leaked. $5.3 billion for 2 aircraft. The Air Force is modifying a pair of 747-8 jets that were originally ordered by a Russian airline that went bankrupt before taking delivery. They bought them at a discount, gutted them completely, and are rebuilding the interiors from scratch. The project is years behind schedule. Critics say the number is obscene. Supporters note that these are not really airplanes. They are flying command centers, nuclear hardened and surgically equipped, and the current ones are over 30 years old and badly overdue for replacement. The history of the plane's design goes back further than most people realize. The famous blue and white paint scheme was created in 1962 by industrial designer Raymond Loewy, working with Jacqueline Kennedy. Before that, the planes were plain silver, just like any other Air Force aircraft. President Reagan later upgraded the communication systems. President Clinton redecorated the interior. President George W. Bush added secure video conferencing after September 11th. President Obama installed new computers throughout. President Trump wanted to repaint the planes red, white, and blue, but never followed through. Each president shapes the plane around their own habits. Obama reportedly kept his office warm, close to 75 degrees. Trump preferred the temperature cooler. The climate control system adjusts independently for every room on board, which sounds like a luxury feature until you realize the system also filters every breath of air for chemical and biological threats before it reaches the cabin. It is one of the few aircraft on Earth specifically designed to protect passengers from a chemical weapon attack through the ventilation system. That level of preparation extends to every corner of the plane, including corners most people would never think to worry about. In 1986, President Reagan was returning from a summit in Japan when the Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurred. Air Force One had to pass near the contaminated airspace. The onboard radiation detectors triggered. The crew took measurements, determined that altitude kept exposure within safe limits, and the shielding protected everyone. The plane also collected air samples during the flight that later helped scientists map how far the radioactive plume had actually traveled. It was, by accident, one of the most consequential air quality monitoring flights ever conducted. There is also a rumor that has circulated for decades and that the Air Force has never confirmed or denied. Somewhere on board, there may be a presidential escape pod, a mechanism that could detach the president's section of the plane in an emergency and parachute him safely to the ground. Some accounts place it near the private office. Others describe the entire forward section separating as a single capsule. Aviation engineers who have studied the design say it is technically feasible. Whether it actually exists, nobody outside a very small group will say. If it does, the world will probably not find out until the planes are retired and the files are declassified. What is not a rumor, and perhaps the strangest detail of all, is that even the toilets on Air Force One are partly classified. The waste management systems are sealed, secured, and not fully public. Some reports suggest the plumbing includes features designed to prevent biological attacks through the sanitation system. The workers who clean the bathrooms require security clearance because the process takes them through areas with sensitive equipment. The Air Force has, with complete seriousness, thought through the national security implications of a toilet. And that, more than the $200,000 hourly rate, or the nuclear shielding, or the surgical suite, is what tells you exactly what kind of machine this is. It is not a plane. It is a floating country. A nation of 102 people, moving at 600 miles per hour, prepared for every scenario from a medical emergency, to a nuclear war, to a classified plumbing threat. The next time you see it on the news, taxiing slowly across the tarmac with that iconic blue stripe catching the light, remember, you are only seeing the outside. Everything that actually matters is hidden.